Alright, this is one of those experiments and videos that should have been completed many months ago, and it is now the middle of November 2021, and I'm having to redo this entire project, although I did post a video on the first attempt at this talking about something else that actually happened, and we'll experiment with that in this video as well. But if you haven't seen that video, and if you're interested to see what happened in the first one, you'll find the link at the end of this video. So basically, just to reiterate what we got going on here, in a nutshell, I'm basically testing to see how plants grow in the beginning stages anyways, in soil and in earthworm castings. So over here I have ProMix. I use this stuff a lot, and I love starting seeds in this. And over here, this is a new product called VermisTerra, and it's just pure earthworm castings. And I tried using this in my garden this past summer. You'll also find a link at the end of that, and at the end of this video for that video in my watermelon garden. So this container over here, these are 5-inch net pots for hydroponics, and I just covered the outside with old socks. We got soil over here and earthworm castings over here, pure earthworm castings, and in the middle here we have a 50-50 mix of both. And on the top here, what I basically put in here is 4 fresh pepper seeds in each one of these, and then I put in 12 tomato seeds and scattered them around fairly evenly on the top of each one. So what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to put just a little bit of dusting on top of each one of these with the ProMix, just to cover the seeds a little bit. I'm going to probably cover the containers with plastic or something like that, just so they germinate. And then we're going to come back and take a look and kind of see what happens. All right, it has been 5 days, and all of these here are the tomato seeds that actually sprouted. These all sprouted actually on the 3rd day. And I am using a heat mat here that does help a lot with germination, and I did actually use this cover here to keep the humidity in and the heat in while they were germinating, but I took this off after the 3rd day. So it's been 2 days since they've been uncovered. I still have the heat mat on, and I expect the pepper seeds to come up pretty soon as well. Typically, pepper seeds, when I germinate them with the heat mat, it's about 7 to 10 days. Maybe it might be a little bit sooner in this case because the seeds are more fresh, but we'll see. Now, as far as the germination rate goes, these all pretty much look about the same. These two here, the soil and the 50-50 mix of the soil and earthworm castings, are pretty much identical when they first came up. These over here, though, were a little bit slower behind for some reason. I'm not quite sure why that is. You can see all of these here, these leaves are a little bit smaller. That's because these sprouted later than the rest of these over here. Now, as far as the reason why I think that these germinated better than I tried the first time with this experiment is because I laid the seeds on top of all of these soil/earthworm castings, and I only sprinkled, like I said, just a tiny bit of the soil on top just to cover the seeds, just barely enough. So if anyone was asking what lights I'm using here, I didn't mention this yet, but these are QG LED light strips. I've had plenty of videos where I've used these for the past couple of years, and these are a little outdated at this point, but they work really well still. These are the ultimate ones. All right, it has now been 10 days since I planted these seeds, and right on time, the pepper seeds have germinated. So there is one right there, and then there is one right there, and there's 2 back there. Those are the 4 that I planted in there. In this one here, there's 4 coming up there. And over here in the earthworm castings, there is only 1 there, and then there's another one sprouting right there. And then the other 2, they have not come up yet. But we'll see if they will. So we'll come back and update this in a few more days. All right, it has been a few more days, and it's gotten to the point now where it's time to start thinning out the seedlings so we can continue on with the experiment. But before I thin them out, I wanted to talk about a couple things that I've noticed here. And for one, there's no real significant difference in the germination rate. They all seem to be doing just fine, except for this over here in the earthworm castings. There was 2 pepper seedlings or 2 pepper seeds that did not germinate, at least not yet. So only 2 seedlings came up in that one, and all 4 came up in the soil and the 50-50. The second thing to note is if you look over here in the soil, these seedlings are growing a little bit faster and they're a little bit larger because of that. To where if you look in the earthworm castings, the pure earthworm castings, they are not growing as fast and they are a little bit smaller. The 50-50 mix, it seems like a mix of both, if you ask me, the height and the rate of growth, and also the color. And it's going to be hard to see on camera here, but there is a difference in color. If you look over here in the soil mix, these are a little bit lighter green than the ones growing over here in the earthworm castings. It's pretty obvious here in person. I don't know if it's going to come across in camera all that well. They're not a lot darker, but it's obvious when you look at it in person. It's not a bad thing if you look over here in the soil. I mean, these look completely normal and healthy. No one would think otherwise. They're not light green or anything like that. I guess if you compare it to those over there, maybe, but it's not abnormal whatsoever. I believe that the reason why these are darker green, there's only usually two reasons why a plant is darker in color, darker green, and that's usually nitrogen or iron. They might have more of that in the earthworm castings. So I'm going to go ahead and actually cut out most of the seedlings in each pot so we can continue on and grow them larger. It just wouldn't be possible to grow them large like as they are. I'm just trying to keep this small scale. I'm going to leave 2 tomato plants in each pot and 2 pepper plants in each pot, and we'll see what happens when we come back. All right, I finished trimming out most of the seedlings in each one of these pots, and I have left 2 pepper plants and 2 tomato plants each, just like I said it would. And I've actually trimmed out the larger ones that were in the soil here because I wanted to match the plant sizes in each one of these pots here, just to make sure they're the same growth figure and everything to make it as fair as possible. The pepper plants over here in the soil, or I should say the pepper seedlings, these here are about the same each, and over here we have one that sprouted probably just a little bit later, so it's a little bit smaller, and then we have one here that's a little bit larger, and I did the same thing over here in the earthworm castings. So we kind of have a good mix of everything here as much as possible. So we're going to give it a few more days and come back and kind of just see what happens. Okay, it's been a few more days, and that means it's now time to leave the best of the best and get rid of the rest. That sounded kind of corny. What that actually means is what I'm going to do here is I'm going to remove one of the tomato plants and keep one in each one of these spots, and I'm going to do the same thing for the pepper seedlings down there as well. So I'm going to remove whatever is there and leave one, which would be the best of the best, basically. So what you can actually see here is I've got the 2 tomato plants here in the soil, which are pretty much the same. I've got 2 tomato plants in the 50-50 earthworm casting soil mix. One's taller, one's shorter. I'll be getting rid of the shorter one and doing the same thing over here in the pure earthworm castings, and then leaving one of the best seedlings. And actually there was one additional seedling that came up a few days ago here in the pure earthworm castings. The 4th one has not come up, which it probably won't. So I'm going to cut these out. We'll come back and I'll just show you what I have left. Okay, here's what's left, and they all pretty much look identical, and they're pretty much all exactly the same height. And even the pepper seedlings here, I've kept the ones that were pretty much identical. So we're going to let these grow out as much as they can in these pots. I'm not going to be adding any fertilizers whatsoever, just water. It's just going to use up whatever's in the soil. I don't want to add any fertilizers throughout this because that's kind of unfair. I think the point of this is really just to be looking at how they grow in the soils as they are. So I'll probably give it a little while here, maybe a week or two. We'll come back and take a look. All right, it has been one more week and I have something interesting to report. We're finally starting to see some differences here. So first we're going to start here with the Pro Mix, the potting soil mix. You can see here that the tomato plant is starting to develop a classic nitrogen deficiency. How do you know that? The lowest leaf here, the very first leaf, which is a seed pod leaf, turning yellow, almost brown. The next leaf up here is starting to become less green and more yellow. Now I know I talked about before how this particular plant in the potting soil didn't have quite as green of leaves versus the other ones. Well, now it's starting to become more yellow and less green, and then the very top leaf looks pretty much fine. So that's the classic signs of a nitrogen deficiency. Not seeing the same thing here with the pepper seedling. Of course, it's too early to tell for that, but we'll take a look at that later on once everything progresses further. Over here in the 50-50 mix of the potting soil and the earthworm castings, we're seeing that this plant looks pretty much healthy. It's very nicely green. Same thing with the pepper seedling, although they all look the same at this point. But if we compare this one here, if we look at this lowest leaf, the seed pod leaf, this here, it looks green and it looks very healthy, but if we compare it to the one over here in the pure earthworm castings, this here is definitely darker green if you compare it to this one. It's not a whole lot of difference. If you were just to look at this plant by itself, you say, oh, it looks really healthy. But compared to this one, there is a big difference. obviously. Now, if you look at the sizes of these, we basically got here small, medium, and large. And that's kind of playing out exactly as you would expect. If you have 100% earthworm castings and it has all the good stuff in there, the nutrients that the plant needs, and then over here you have half as much because it's mixed with the potting soil and then all potting soil, that's exactly what you would expect to happen. Now we're going to let these plants grow a little bit further and see how big they can get, although this plant here is obviously going to be trailing way behind. But that's also why we're growing not just 2 plants in each one, but 2 different plants in each one to see how it affects each type of plant. So we will be going along quite a bit here. Eventually this is probably not going to do too good. This may actually die, who knows. But we'll still have a pepper seedling to watch in all of these. Now I also want to point out here that the reason why this plant is not doing so good in the potting soil is not the fault of the potting soil. It's not the fault of the ProMix whatsoever. That potting soil doesn't have a lot of plant food or nutrients to start with. It's a very light amount. It works great for starting seeds and it works great for potting plants, whether it's a house plant or something you'd pot in a plant outside. But it's not meant to have a ton of fertilizers in it. It's a very light amount. And at this point here, this is when you would start giving it plant food supplementally. Now eventually the soils over here, like this one here, the 50/50 and the earthworm castings, eventually those are going to start needing additional plant food as well as the plants get larger. You can't plant something in a potting soil and expect it to just grow there forever without feeding it. It just so happens that the ProMix here doesn't have a lot to begin with, so you'd have to start feeding it sooner. But this is kind of the point of the experiment here, is to kind of see what happens when we look at it like this. So in the back you can actually see, I did a short video on this. That's the ProMix there, the potting soil, and that's the 100% earthworm castings where I'm doing the seed starting and trying to germinate seeds. And if you saw that short video, I'll go ahead and link it to this video, but you can see that nothing germinated. And it has been 2 weeks now and nothing has came up in the earthworm castings. And quite a bit has come up over there, as you can see, in the potting soil. Now, people might think, oh, there's too much pressure on the seeds because the soil is more dense. I only sprinkled a very, very light dusting on top of the seeds when I put them in there, and I put a lot of seeds in there to try to give it the best chance possible for the comparison, and still none of them have come up. And it's exactly what I observed before when I did that experiment earlier. So there's something in the earthworm castings. Maybe it's a pH difference or something like that. I'm not sure because I haven't tested it, but there's something in the earthworm castings that's preventing germination. Okay, it has been 4 more days, and there are some things developing here that I feel are worthy of discussion. First off, you can clearly see there's becoming a more defined difference between these plants. So the soil, small, the 50/50 earthworm castings, medium, and then the pure earthworm castings, large. As you can clearly see, the earthworm castings are having an effect just looking at those plants. Next up here is the nutrient deficiencies, and we're seeing the exact same thing happen in the pepper seedlings now. You can see here these leaves are starting to turn a very lime green to yellow color, the old ones. The new ones here coming out the top, the first true leaves, are still okay. And over here in the 50/50, it looks about the same. These are just a little bit greener on the first leaves here. And then over here in the pure earthworm castings, it's a night and day difference. So this pepper seedling here is growing the exact same way as this tomato plant, in that there is not really any nitrogen deficiency. There's no yellowing of the leaves, and it's actually growing a little bit faster. And we're seeing the same thing over here. It's just growing a little bit faster than the one that's growing over here. So there's a clear difference between the amount of nutrients the plant is absorbing in these pots. And what's interesting here, what I was pointing out with the air pruning method here, or I should say the root pruning method with using these socks, is you can see the roots poking through down here. And it's just that's partly because I've been bottom watering these, and so the roots have been growing into the water that would sit in there for a little bit of time. However, once this dries out, because this is still moist, these roots will prune themselves, and if they didn't have this, if they weren't poking through, they would start to wind around the pot, and then it would become root bound. So this root pruning method here air pruning, air pot, whatever you want to call it, is very good for potted plants, especially fast-growing plants like something you would grow fruits and vegetables in. So we're going to let this grow a little bit further, and then we'll come back and see what happens. All right, it has been another 10 days, and we are now seeing a nitrogen deficiency across all 3 of these plants, now including the one growing in the pure earthworm castings, and you can see that here with the lower leaves turning yellow, same thing with the pepper seedling. And because of that deficiency, I have observed stunted growth on all 3 of these plants. So pretty much they have not grown since the last segment of this video, and they're not looking happy either. Now, we've been talking about nitrogen for a little bit here in this video, and it's pretty obvious that you have a small plant and a large plant over here. So if you look at this plant, it's pretty much twice the size of this plant over here, which has less nitrogen. And you can see that here in the potting mix, the total available nitrogen in there says 0.3%. And over here in the earthworm castings, it's 0.6%. So basically you have double the available nitrogen in the earthworm castings versus this potting mix, and you can see that here in the potting soil and the earthworm castings. You can see there's, I would say that would be twice as much because you got twice as much growth, and this one here started turning yellow at the bottom leaves first before this one did. So, and then of course you got the one in the middle, which is a mix of both, and it's right in the middle in between as far as the size goes. So that makes a lot of sense. But we're also going to look at one more thing, and that's the pH of the soil. All right, what we have here is 2 water samples, and the water I'm using here is RODI water, so it doesn't contain any bicarbonates to influence the pH of these samples here. So I've taken a scoop of soil out of the planter that was in the pure earthworm castings, and I put it in the water here in this one, and this was from the one that was in the potting soil, the Pro Mix. And I stirred them up, and I've let them sit for 24 hours to settle out. I've had them covered, obviously, too. And so what we're going to do here is take a little sample with this pipette here out of the earthworm castings, and we'll see what the pH of this is. This is a very easy way to test the pH without spending a whole lot of money, because the test kit for this is relatively cheap. Now, the earthworm castings, to start out, is a pH of 7. It's a neutral pH. I've tested that twice already to make sure. And when I've been watering these plants, I've been using tap water, and the tap water contains bicarbonates, so that can also influence the pH. Now, I don't expect to see much of a difference in the earthworm castings unless the pH has been changing from something decaying or something like that. I doubt it, though. So we'll go ahead and take, we'll do like 4 drops in this. You'll see the change right away. All right, so that's pretty green. Let's kind of stir it up just a little bit. Yeah, so I don't think the pH changed much. The color on this, if I let it sit for just a second here, the color will change by just a little bit. And that's pretty much looking exactly as it did before when I tested this. When I just put the straight soil in there, I wasn't actually taking it out of the pot. When I was originally testing it, I was taking it out of the bag. So now this has been sitting with the plant growing in it. I'm just basically, what we're looking at here is just to see if it's changed at all. So that is about a pH of 7. Maybe just a little bit higher than 7 it could be, or maybe a little lower. It's hard to tell with this solution. It doesn't really matter too much because a 0.1 difference, 0.2 difference, it's not really gonna matter all that much. We're looking for more dramatic differences. So I'm gonna go ahead and rinse this out with some RODI water, and we'll test the one that was growing in the soil. All right, I have all that rinsed out. I'm gonna go ahead and test the sample from the potting soil. And a little bit more than that. There we go. I'm suspecting this probably is going to be the same pH of 5-ish. I don't know, wow. I'm surprised. Okay. That is definitely not 5 anymore. And what we're looking at here, so 5 would be orange there, and 6 would be yellow, and that is not yellow. I've seen this before, and it's much brighter looking than that. So that's pretty close to a pH of 6.5. I would call that sort of in between a 6 and 6.5, so we'll call it 6.2. Even if I hold it up against here, yeah, so that would be I would call it 6.2. I would say that's just about perfect for pH in a soil. So it's obviously, the pH of the soil is obviously not affecting their growth, because between a 6.2 and a 7 pH difference in soil, it's not really that big of a difference. I've done testing with plants growing in different pHs in hydroponics and stuff like that. It's not, it doesn't cause a very drastic difference such as what you've seen here in this video. So now we got a couple more things to talk about. Let's go back to the plants. Earlier in this video I said I wasn't going to be giving plant food to any of these plants during this process, just to be fair, and I think that was the correct decision because we're only looking at what's contained in the soil, and if we were to give these plant food, that would kind of obscure those results. And I really like the results I saw here. And because of that, we're actually going to be doing another video where I'm going to be growing 2 plants, one in the Pro Mix and another one in the Pro Mix, but in the second one I'm going to be giving this Vitality, which is basically a earthworm castings extract, and we'll see if that has any effect on it. And then we'll be doing a third video, but I'm going to discuss more about the third video in the second video. So if you enjoyed this video, if you want to follow along, please subscribe, click the like button, and thanks for watching.